Welcome back, brothers and sisters. I am Braden, and this is The Second Legacy. If you are tuning in from one of our prior videos or the announcement video that Tim and I both did on our independent channels, welcome to The Second Legacy. This is something that we're putting together that really can make an impact. We're going to bring a little bit of comedy, a little bit of reality, and a little bit of collaboration to the Second Amendment fight that we deal with every single day in order to pass the blessing of the Second Amendment along to the next generation. If you enjoy the show, we'd love your feedback right down there in the comments field. And please hit that subscribe button and that notification bell because it will help us build the channel and also get to know you guys a little bit better. But the content that we're going to focus on today is specifically what is going on in California. I know Tim and I have prepared a little bit of a list of what we're going to be talking about, but we've had two extreme tragedies in 3 days in a complete gun control state. And that's what we're going to dive into because there's a lot of things that we need to break down that, to be honest, beg the question. And with that, I'll throw it over to my partner, Tim. How are you doing today? What are we going to talk about?
Well, doing pretty good, man, despite everything that's been going on in the Second Amendment community. I mean, we've had, pretty big news days for the last couple of weeks. But, with this most recent events, shall we say, in California, I think it just serves to illustrate, once again, that gun control doesn't work. Now, if you take a look at every town and their rating of California, they give California pretty high marks in terms of their gun control. Right? California is probably one of the most strict gun control states in the union, with Illinois biting at the heels, trying desperately to out California. But the point being, California has extremely strict laws on everything, right? Everything from magazines, types of firearms you can use, bullet buttons. We know the whole jargon. So how is it possible in a state that has the most strict gun control, or some of the most strict gun control, how is it possible that these tragedies continue to happen? And when they do continue to happen, the knee-jerk reaction from the powers that be, once again, is more calls for gun control. So the laws aren't working. Criminals, by their very nature, break laws. That's why they're criminals. And so they think perhaps if they pass just one more law, that suddenly the criminals will come to the realization that maybe they shouldn't be leading a life of crime, and they'll, abide by the law and they'll stop their criminal acts. Or is it possible that these laws do nothing but disarm innocent people that could be better served by defending themselves? Something our own government has come to that very same conclusion, but then erases all evidences of it. And that's a separate discussion. I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole. But even our own government knows the truth, that firearms save lives more so than they jeopardize lives in any way whatsoever. Millions of lives are saved every year by the legal use of firearms. So these gun control laws obviously don't work. And California, once again, is evidence of that. Now, sadly, I live in a state that neighbors Illinois, and Illinois likes to blame its problems with violence on us in Indiana. They claim that their problems, their gang violence, their shootings in downtown Chicago are the result of Hoosiers supplying them with firearms. But the facts don't bear that out either. So it seems like Newsom and, Pritzker and all these other people in these anti-gun states just love to point the fingers everywhere, but they never take a look at themselves and their own policies and what might actually be causing the problems. And they never want to address the underlying core issues. They just constantly want to blame guns and say that if we just take guns away, then suddenly maybe this, this culture of violence will just end. And obviously that's not the case.
Right. And so some of the stuff that we're about to dive into, I mean, that was an excellent introduction for the stuff we're going to dive into. And we've got the actual information from Everytown for Gun Safety, how they actually rank California and their gun control laws. We've got actual clip evidence of how someone who was unarmed was able to save lives. I mean, the stuff that we're about to break into, if you are new to the gun world, if you are new to the conversation, this is coming from a place and intent of we can save more lives by arming ourselves. We can save more lives by responsibly taking up the blessings that we have been given. And we have the Second Amendment to do just that. And so while I go into this, I'm going to show you exactly where California sits. And Mr. Producer, we can pull up number one. I'm just going to show them really quickly. California has some of the strongest gun laws in the country. Now, this is coming from Everytown for Gun Safety, a leading gun control group, and leads the nation having the most comprehensive system for removing firearms from those who are legally prohibited from having a gun. That's red flag laws. With gun sense candidate Gavin Newsom as governor, the state has enacted new gun safety legislation. So again, raving reviews from Everytown for Gun Safety. If we go over to number two, Mr. Producer, you can see they are ranked number one on Everytown for Gun Safety. No ifs, ands, or buts. California gets the gold medal for gun control. Now, the big thing that they're lauding him for is he includes raising the minimum age for sales and transfers of firearms, invested in state funds to support evidence-based community violence intervention strategies, To become a safer state, California can strengthen its background checks by allowing the state to have discretion over gun purchases by people who are at risk of harming themselves or others. So that's where we're at. This is not like a Georgia, an Indiana, a Kansas. This is a very, very progressive gun control state. And the terrible part about what we were witnessing is you're watching in real time that when the population is disarmed, a person with malintent can cause irreparable damage to multiple people, multiple communities, because there's no way to stop them until it's over and then they are resolved. It's never in the moment, unlike in other gun-friendly states where you see multiple examples of threats immediately stopped and lives immediately saved. And that kind of conflicts with a little bit of the narrative when gun control is called for. But that kind of speaks to what we're talking about. And I think that's such a huge point to understand where they're at, yet it still happens.
Here's another interesting point with regards to gun control and its ineffectiveness. So if you take a look at, what transpired in Monterey Park, the bad guy was armed with a handgun, right? Now, oftentimes when these news events occur, there's a narrative that the anti-gun media immediately wants to push out. They make a lot of assumptions and they push out their intended narrative, what they want the people to believe. And they don't necessarily care about the facts. Many times they don't have the facts because the facts haven't come in from the scene yet. But that doesn't stop them from jumping in front of a camera and giving their version of events. And almost always it may be, they may claim that it's racially motivated, that they had an AR-15, that, all these assumptions will be made. And then later down the road, we'll find out, well, no, it wasn't really racially motivated. No, it wasn't an AR-15 that was used. But that doesn't matter, because what people pay attention to are the headlines that hit the airwaves at the moment that news breaks. And we can use the events at the Olympic Park tragedy that took place, where the media and everybody else blamed the security guard for the actions of that day. It turned out being a man by the name of Eric Rudolph that was the actual bomber, but they blamed a security guard. And in the initial news reports, everybody did, the media did, FBI did, everybody was blaming the security guard. And he, even though he was exonerated till the day he died, and unfortunately he's passed, he had to live with the fact that people still blamed him for that, even though he had nothing to do with it. He actually tried to save lives that day. And this goes back to the fact that the media just wants to jump on this false narrative, push it out there because people will believe the false narrative. And if a week later the truth comes out, 90% of the people have already tuned out and moved on to something else. They just believe the original false narrative. And here we have, once again, it was said that it was racially motivated, that it was an attack against Asians. It turns out that the attacker was Asian themselves, that, it was an assault weapon. It turned out to be a handgun. And they had an illegally manufactured homemade silencer on the firearm. You just saw the video that the producer played for us there. So the gun control obviously wasn't working, because the guy even had a homemade silencer, which has been illegal for him to do for years. But clearly the law didn't stop him from going out and making a homemade silencer to affix to the weapon. And then you saw the person that disarmed him. Now, could you imagine how much easier it might have been for that person to defend themselves and other people had that person been armed? But because it's California, it's very difficult to get a concealed carry permit in the state. It's not easily done. It's not like in Indiana where you just apply on a website and, now we're constitutional carry. A year ago, you would apply on a website and you would just get your permit in the mail, no fingerprints, pictures, or anything like that. Now we're constitutional carry. California is not. And so this person, God bless them, just used hands and feet and disarmed the gunman. But, again, once we have all these strict gun laws in California, both at the federal level and at the state level, and yet so many were violated and it did nothing to prevent this from happening. So why do they keep calling for more gun control when clearly it doesn't do anything?
So I think the incredibly important piece to dive into this is that individual on that clip that was just played. You're looking at someone who stood up to someone who was armed, manually took away a threat, and then dealt with the issue, which is incredible. And honestly, that takes a pair. But what if that had occurred at the first location? What if that exact same 26-year-old had been at that location? Take any kind of firearm out of it. It goes to the exact same principle. If you are prepared to defend those that are around you and you have the means to do so, in this case, it just so happened he didn't need to have a firearm to protect those around him. He just used his hands like a boss. But again, it's the exact same principle. Man, if that 26-year-old had been at this location, it's the same concept. If someone else there had been armed and able to be protecting those that were there, a lot of times there's this idea that if you want to carry a firearm to protect yourself, you have this idea that you want to be Rambo, or there's this negative connotation placed upon you, and that's the furthest thing from the truth. Honestly, the people I know that carry firearms for protection are for protection of their families, for those that they love. That is the reason. It is something bigger than themselves, because if you look at all the ramifications of carrying a firearm and having to use it in a defensive manner, they are massive. But to be able to do that, to sacrifice potentially freedom or financial means for defense, all these different pieces, this is a act of courage and an act of defense that is not incredibly Rambo based. It's defending others. And that's the point of what we're talking about here. California prevents you from even making that choice yourself. And that's the crux of the issue. They're putting it at guns are the problem, not people who would choose to do this. And that's the big thing we're trying to hit.
Absolutely. And they always shift the blame away from the criminal. They always want to place the blame on an inanimate object. So and that's why you will never hear me use the term gun violence. It doesn't exist. Guns are incapable of committing violence. Guns are inanimate objects. There's no such thing as gun violence. And we in the Second Amendment community need to stop using that phrase, because that's a phrase that's been carefully constructed to make it look as though guns are evil machines that are capable of committing evil acts on their own. And they're simply not.
Just like assault weapons.
Right. Well, assault weapon is a made up term to make it sound nasty, mean. Right. And, who needs an assault weapon? Well, fortunately, they don't exist, if that's your concern, but, whatever. The same thing with gun violence. This wasn't an act of gun violence. This was a man committed to carrying out violence who happened to use a firearm. Now, had the other person had a firearm themselves, it could have perhaps been stopped even sooner. I think maybe perhaps is the point that you were trying to get to earlier. But because California makes it so difficult for people to defend themselves. And let's face it, folks, based upon Supreme Court law, the law of the land says that the local police and federal law enforcement has no obligation under the Constitution or anything else to protect you. You are your own first responder. There's nobody that is responsible for your safety. If you call 911, it takes them a half hour to get there, you don't get to sue them. They're not responsible for your safety. So when something bad happens, you need to be able to step up and take charge of the situation like this Good Samaritan did and defend yourself and others that may need defense. In my opinion, it's a heck of a lot more easy to be done if the playing ground is level and the good guy has a firearm. Imagine if the good person in this scenario was a 90-pound female, right? The handgun that person may have been carrying would be the equalizer, would allow that 90-pound female to take on a larger male potentially. I'm not saying that all women are, weak or anything like that, so don't read into my statement. I'm just saying that firearms are absolutely necessary in a modern society where you want to keep the peace and where you're responsible for your own safety when the government has clearly stated it is not responsible for your safety.
And in wrapping that up, I think this has been a really good conversation around all the different nuances of what goes on in these situations, because these are terrible situations. Neither Tim nor I are advocating at all for anything like this to occur. But you have to understand that the laws that were in place in California, and every Town for Gun Safety gives them a #1 rating. I can't even count the amount of laws that were violated by this individual. From the standpoint of what was produced, from the standpoint of what was attached, from the standpoint of capacity, from the standpoint of the actual firearm, from the standpoint of background checks, all the different pieces here. The amount of laws that were broken was insurmountable because a criminal is going to criminal. That's the entire point. Yeah. When they decide that they've crossed the line and it's about to be criminal time, they're not going to stop and go, oh, hold on a second. There's a law. We have that insurance policy. We have that safeguard after all of those things have been passed, because civilians have the right to own firearms and bear firearms in this country. And that's not going away. And I think that is an amazing way to wrap this conversation up.
All right, guys. Well, we hope you enjoyed today's conversation with regards to what transpired in California. It's important that we all stay politically active. If you live in California, I know that you guys probably feel pretty beaten down right about now. I get that. If you live in Illinois, you're feeling pretty beaten down right now, although there was a court decision in your favor recently. Perhaps that's a topic for another video. But please don't lose the faith, guys. We have to continue fighting. We can win this battle, and we can win this battle by being politically active. Join a group like Gun Owners of America. Gun Owners of America has 40 plus years of no compromise positions. They fight every day in DC. Both of us are heavily involved with Gun Owners of America, and you can sign up for free information. You don't have to become a member, although I would recommend that you do, but sign up for their email list. And when things are happening at the national level, they'll send you an email. They're not going to send you a bunch of Chicken Little sky is falling stuff. This is relevant information that will enable you to intelligently contact your representatives and to become part of the solution versus being part of the problem. And part of the problem is sitting around and doing nothing. Guys, please be sure to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And we look forward to seeing you again on a future episode here on Second Legacy. Thank you for watching.